All right, we're less than 3 weeks away from the start of the college football season 2023 edition, and it's time for my final preseason top 25. Let's go. Yeah, good morning. That is Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, live on YouTube for you. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Also, in addition to that as well, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. Believe it or not, some of them are even watchable. I don't know about this one. You can let me know in the comments down below. All right, time to update the top 25. I only do 3 top 25 rankings during the entirety of the quote-unquote offseason. I do one after the final signing day in February. I update it after all the spring games are played in April, and then I do a final preseason ranking about this time every single year. So this will be the last top 25 I do until games start being played, which, like I mentioned, just under 3 weeks away from week 0. All right, I'm going to put my last top 25 ranking up on the screen. So this is the one I did right after the spring games. You can see it right here. Screenshot it, pause the video, whatever you need to do if you want to get an idea of where I had the teams ranked heading into today. So what I do is I use my last ranking, my most previous ranking, this one I did after the spring games. I use that as sort of a baseline of how I build this current ranking. So there you go. All right, I am going to show you the entire top 25, but I'm actually going to do the top 10 first, and then I'll show you 11 through 25. So we're going to start at number 10, work our way down to number 1, and then we'll put up 11 through 25. At number 10, Texas Longhorns. Is this the year Texas finally wins the Big 12? They haven't won the Big 12 since, what, 2009? They are the favorite to win the Big 12 this year. And some people, look, I get it that Texas has been pretty bad and has missed expectations several times over the last decade or so. But there's this idea out there that, oh, Texas is picked to win it every year, and every year they don't. Texas has not been picked to win the Big 12 every single year. Oklahoma was picked to win the Big 12 for a bunch of years in a row, because they did win the Big 12 a bunch of years in a row. Texas is the favorite to win the Big 12 this year, though. I've got them at number 10. Now, that's up quite a bit from where I had them in my last ranking. I had them at 13 in the ranking that I did after the spring games. They finished last season ranked 25th at 8-5. I've got them at number 10. The expectation is to win the Big 12. I think they've got a shot, although maybe an outside shot, of getting into the playoffs. The issue, if you're Texas, of course, you got to play Alabama early in the season. And if Texas loses that game to Bama, even if it's close, Texas is in a situation where they've got to run off a string of basically 11 straight wins. I think they've, or whatever. Do they play on week 2 or is it week 4? Anyway, if Texas loses that game to Bama, that's it. They've got no more margin for error. They've then got to run the table throughout the remainder of the regular season and win the Big 12 title game if they want to get into the playoffs. If they somehow beat Bama, then, of course, they're going to be on everybody's radar. It'll probably vault them up into the top 5 or 6 of most rankings, and they'll have a mulligan, sort of, for later in the year should they happen to have a hiccup and slip up somewhere down the road. But I do expect Texas to compete for and win the Big 12 in 2023. I've got them at number 10. At number 9, I've got Washington, and I have had a really difficult time this offseason sort of trying to differentiate between a handful of Pac-12 teams. And there's obviously a lot going on right now with the Pac-12. How much effect or impact that will have on those teams' performance on the field this year, I'm not really sure. I mean, we look back at Texas and Oklahoma last year. They both had kind of disappointing seasons. How much of that, or was any of that, because of sort of the distraction of heading to the SEC? Probably not. I mean, you can find plenty of other reasons why Texas and Oklahoma struggled last year other than the fact that maybe they had their eyes down the road, right? Oklahoma had a lot of injury issues. Their defense was horrible. Brent Venables was in as his first year head coach. So I don't know, but, you know, Washington, Utah, Oregon State. I guess you could even throw Southern Cal in there, although I've got them ranked a little bit higher. You'll see them in a second. It's very hard for me to differentiate between those 3 or 4 teams in the Pac-12. And sort of the bigger question I have about the Pac-12 as far as how it relates to the rest of college football or to this college football season as a whole, can any of those teams in the Pac-12 get to the end with a Pac-12 title and 1 loss or less. They've had a very hard time doing that. Southern Cal, of course, lost last year in the Pac-12 title game to Utah, knocking them out of the playoffs. That was their second loss. It's happened to Oregon a couple of times where they lost a second game late in November. Utah, of course, has won the Pac-12 2 seasons in a row, but is yet to be able to do it with 1 or less loss. So just having a hard time getting into the playoffs. My question about Washington is more a question about just the Pac-12 in general, because I do believe that there are 4 to 5 teams in the Pac-12, and it's the same teams everyone talks about all offseason: Southern Cal, Oregon, Washington, Utah, and maybe you throw Oregon State in there too. I think are all legitimate top 25 teams. I think 3, maybe even 4 of them could be top 15 type teams. But will any of them be good enough to sort of get to that next level and make the playoffs in 2023? I'm not sure. I decided to put Washington at 9 in this ranking, ahead of both Oregon and Utah. Main reason why: I think Washington's going to have the best defense in the Pac-12. Southern Cal, who we'll talk about in a second, I think is going to have the best offense in the Pac-12. And I said, well, let's put them ahead of everyone else in the Pac-12 for now. Again, my top 25 is not a prediction or a projection of where I think teams will end at the end of the year. My top 25s, my rankings that I do, are an indication of where I feel a team should be ranked at that particular point in time. So I'm not suggesting that Washington will finish 9th. I'm not suggesting that Texas will finish 10th. This is just sort of where I feel the teams deserve to be ranked. As of today, I've got Washington at 9. They finished 8 in the final AP poll last year at 11-2. And I believe I had them at 9 in my April poll as well. So they didn't move at all from my April ranking until now. At 8, I've got Florida State. They fell back a spot from 7 to 8. It's not anything that Florida State did. There's been no injuries that I'm aware of. Nothing about how I feel or think about Florida State has changed since I did my last ranking in April. It's just there's another team that I'm a little bit higher on today than I was in April, so I had to move them up ahead of Florida State. But I still think Florida State has a legitimate shot to win the ACC and an outside shot at getting into the college football playoff. I think Florida State and Texas, to me, a similar story for them. Texas plays Alabama early, right? Of course, Florida State plays LSU early. Win, and you're kind of in the driver's seat if you're Florida State, right? Because you've got a mulligan. Yeah, you beat LSU, you can afford to lose a game later in the year, no matter what game it is. If you win the ACC and your name is Florida State and you've got 1 or less loss, you're getting into the college football playoff. Huge game beginning of the season with LSU. They play Clemson on the road, I believe, in week 4. Other than that, the schedule appears to be they should be able to navigate that schedule, I believe. Any more than 2 losses for Florida State in this regular season, I believe, would be a bit of a disappointment, given all the sort of the hype that's been around them this offseason. They've got a ton of returning talent and production on both sides of the ball. I think Jordan Travis is a legit Heisman Trophy candidate or contender. Not sure if he'll make the final 3 or 4, but I think he's a name that will be talked about and associated with the Heisman throughout the season. I also think Florida State's defense is going to be improved over what we saw last year. I think Florida State is a legitimate top 10 team. I think they've got a shot to they should definitely play for the ACC title. I think they've got a legitimate shot at winning it. Probably going to play Clemson twice, once in the regular season, once in the ACC title game. And if things break their way, I think they could find themselves in the playoffs at the end of the season. I've got Florida State at number 8. At number 7, I've got Southern Cal, and this is the main reason why Florida State dropped a spot. Is because I decided to move Southern Cal up from number 10 to number 7. While I'm still not sold on Lincoln Riley's defense, and I am not going to be sold on a Lincoln Riley defense until I see a Lincoln Riley defense perform over the course of a season. I do like some of the pieces that Lincoln Riley has added to that defense from last year to this year. Most notably, of course, Bear Alexander, an interior defensive lineman from the University of Georgia. He was a freshman last year, and I think everyone knows how good Georgia's defense has been over the last few years. So just think how good you have to be as a football player to start on that defense as a true freshman, and that's what Bear Alexander did in a lot of games last year. I think he's a really, really good player and an immediate difference maker for Southern Cal on the interior of that defensive line. Now, I've still got plenty of other questions about Southern Cal's defense, which is why I sort of have them at a ceiling here of 7 because offensively, returning Heisman winner in Caleb Williams, they're going to have one of the most explosive offenses in all of college football. Lincoln Riley does it every single year. They bring in Marshawn Lloyd from South Carolina to run the ball this year. I really, really like him if he can stay healthy. They got a ton of weapons on the outside. Southern Cal offensively is going to be one of the best teams in the country. I've got to see that defense perform at a much higher level. So I'm trying to sort of split the difference between everything I've seen from a Lincoln Riley defense over the last 5 to 6 years, which is just absolute poverty. I'm trying to balance that with the idea that I do like some of the pieces that they've added. I like the idea of year 2 of a head coach, kind of. I know he's been a head coach longer than that, but a year 2 at Southern Cal, so you got a lot of players in that system now for just the second year. I'm fairly confident Southern Cal defensively can take a step forward. Can they take enough of a step forward to navigate their season with 1 or less loss, like we talked about when we talked about Washington and sort of the gauntlet that the Pac-12 teams are going to have to go through? I'm not sure, but I don't think it would be a complete shock to see Southern Cal in the playoffs at the end of the season. Look, the reality is if you're in the top 10 of a preseason ranking, anybody's really, you've at least got an outside shot, I think, of getting into the playoffs. Otherwise, what are you doing in the top 10? I think Southern Cal falls into that category. They finished last season ranked 12th after a New Year's Six bowl loss to Tulane, 11-3. I had them at 10 in my spring ranking. I've moved them up to 7 in my final preseason ranking for 2023. At number 6, I've got Alabama. This is probably the team I thought hardest about in terms of where to put them for this final offseason ranking. There's a couple of sort of contradictory attitudes that I have about Alabama. Without question, I believe these 2 things. They're the most talented team top to bottom in all of college football. Their roster, no one else's roster can compete with Alabama's roster in total from top to bottom. Recruiting classes back that up. We all know the story. They've had the number 1 recruiting class something like 9 of the last 12 years or whatever it is. They've got the talent to win every single game they play. That's the one thing that I know beyond the shadow of a doubt. Number 2 is that Nick Saban is the greatest college football coach of all time. There's just no arguing or debating that point. And people who are still trying to do it are just making themselves look like fools in the process. Anytime you have both of those things, the most talented team and the best coach in the history of the game, you're going to have a shot to win it all. And as much as I've talked about Bama this offseason, and it's been a lot, Bama is one of the teams that has a shot to win it all. Just like Southern Cal, just like Florida State, Washington, Texas, every team we've talked about so far, and every team we're going to talk about today in the top 10. My questions about Alabama are the same questions that everyone else has, including the majority of sane Alabama fans. They're replacing both their coordinators. Now, with Kevin Steele, I have less questions. He's been there before. He's worked under Saban multiple times, and Saban is a defensive guy. So I tend to give Saban the benefit of the doubt on the defensive coordinator hires, just because I know Saban's going to have a strong hand in that defense. And even though it let him down a couple of times last year in key points, overall, I expect Bama's defense to be pretty good year in and year out. It's going to have a few years where it doesn't live up to the sort of Bama expectations, but overall, they're going to have a pretty good defense. And adding Kevin Steele, I don't think throws up any red flags, at least not to me. They do lose Will Anderson, but Dallas Turner comes back. I think they'll be better in the back end this year than they were last year. Kool-Aid McKinstry might be one of the best corners in the country by the end of the year. And I'm willing to go out on a limb and say they're not going to give up 52 points to Tennessee this season. I do have some questions about Alabama, mostly on the offensive side of the ball, starting with the offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees. He's really, really young. He hasn't really accomplished anything anywhere he's been. He was at Notre Dame last year. Didn't go great. Now it was a first-year head coach there. And so there's a lot of other areas you can look at with Notre Dame last year and say, well, they struggled here, they struggled there. In other words, it's not as simple. Notre Dame last year, it's not as simple as pointing at Tommy Rees and going, it's his fault. That's not what I'm saying. But he's a young guy, and it didn't go well at Notre Dame last year. They lost to Marshall. They lost to Stanford, which was 2 horrible teams. They sort of started to turn it around in the second half of the season. They got a pretty good win over Clemson and finished with 3 or 4 losses or whatever it was in their head coach's first year, Marcus Freeman. So you bring him in from Notre Dame. So we'll start there. Okay, so that's an obvious question mark. You're changing coordinators. Bryce Young gone off to the NFL, so we have a quarterback competition in Tuscaloosa. Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson. Neither one has been impressive. That now Lou just hates Alabama. Just wait, hide, and watch. There's nothing either one of those two players have done that has impressed anybody. Nothing. And that's just the reality of the situation. Jalen Milroe got a start last year, played a significant amount of playing time in another game last year. Wasn't impressive in either case. And you say, well, he's young. Okay, I get it. But you have all offseason. You get ready. The spring game comes around. Neither Jalen Milroe or Ty Simpson looked all that impressive in the spring game. Alabama, Nick Saban, Tommy Rees, they dip into the transfer portal, and they bring in Tyler Buckner, the quarterback from Notre Dame, who was at Notre Dame last year under Tommy Rees, while they were busy losing to Marshall, a game where they scored 13 points with Tommy Rees as offensive coordinator and Tyler Buckner as quarterback. Tyler Buckner didn't impress very many people last year either. So there are legitimate question marks at Alabama about who's going to play quarterback, on top of the fact that whoever it is replacing Bryce Young. Best case scenario for Bama, none of those quarterbacks is going to give them what Bryce Young did. Alabama's going to have to sort of reinvent itself offensively, right? They don't have the weapons at wide receiver that they had over the last 6 or 7 years. There's no Julio Jones or Calvin Ridley or Devontae Smith or Jerry Jeudy or what's the guy's name? Williamson or whatever. There are none of those guys. Chances are, if you're watching this video and you're not an Alabama fan, you can't name 2 Alabama wide receivers. They led the SEC in drop passes last year. The majority of those receivers are back, so they have a year of experience. They just weren't very good last year. They just weren't very dynamic. And that was with a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback in Bryce Young and a first-round NFL draft pick dropping dimes to those wide receivers. Now you've got Ty Simpson and or Jalen Mildew and or Tyler Buckner, who is an obvious drop-off from Bryce Young, who's going to be thrown to those same wide receivers. I don't think Alabama's going to have the dynamic passing game that we saw under Tua or Jalen Hurts or Mac Jones in 2020 or Bryce Young the last couple of years. And it's pretty obvious they're not going to have that. So what are they going to have? They're going to have one of the best offensive lines that they've had in the last few years, and they're going to try to pound the ball between the tackles, kind of turning the clock back to the early 2010s, right? Think Derrick Henry. That's a good idea if you have Derrick Henry. They don't have Derrick Henry. What they do have is Jace McClellan. He returns from last year. Jahmyr Gibbs is gone. Their best running back from last year. He's off to the NFL. Jace McClellan is back. Jace McClellan's a good running back. I've described Jace McClellan this way in the past. It's not meant to be an insult. This is just how I feel about Jace McClellan. There's probably 50 of them in college football. Everybody that plays running back at the college football level is good to some degree, or you wouldn't be a scholarship running back at a Power 5 university, right? So I'm not saying Jace McClellan's not any good. He's good enough to play running back in college. But there's about 50 of him spread around college football. There's nothing especially special to me about Jace McClellan. So you got a couple of freshman running back. There's a very highly rated and recruited. Justice Haynes is one that I like a lot. Dad played for Georgia 20 years ago. Georgia was in on him pretty heavy, missed out on him. Alabama got him. I think he's going to be a really good running back. Looked good in the spring game when he played in the spring game. We'll see what that means going forward for this year. But I don't think either Justice Haynes as a true freshman or Jace McClellan as a veteran is going to give Alabama what Derrick Henry gave them back in those days, which is what they're looking to get back to. Alabama's got a handful of difficult games. The majority of them are at home. They get Texas at home, they get LSU at home, and they get Tennessee at home. Most people would consider that to be 3 of their tougher games of the season, at least right now the way things look. They play on the road at Texas A&M. They got to play Ole Miss. They got a couple of other potential landmines. But we'll see. Alabama's been a better team at home than they have been on the road the last few years. But I decided to put Alabama at 6, basically right in the middle of the top 10. I don't think there's a soul alive that would be shocked if Alabama won a national title because they're the most talented team in the country and they've got Nick Saban roaming the sidelines. I also don't think it's ridiculous to expect Alabama to maybe have one of the worst years they've had in the last 10 years or so. They could lose 2 or 3 regular season games. They lost a couple of regular season games last year. It could potentially happen again. There's no clear replacement for Bryce Young like we talked about, although I do think Alabama will be better in certain areas than they were last year. I'm not convinced it's enough areas to make up the difference to where they would want to be in order to win a national title. I've got them at number 6. They finished 5 in the final AP ranking last year at 11-2. I had him at 6 after the spring game. I've still got him at 6 now. Time for the top 5. I've got Ohio State at 5. Questions at the quarterback position is really what it comes down to me for Ohio State. Now, Ohio State has proven that they are a legitimate top 5, 6 team almost every single year going back over a decade, really. Urban Meyer comes in, wins a national title back in 2014 or 2015, whatever it was. Continues to win 10, 11, 12 games a year after that. He leaves. Ryan Day comes in, same thing. They're winning 10, 11, 12 games almost every single year. Ryan Day's yet to win a national title, but that's the only thing he's yet to win. He's won the Big Ten multiple times. He's beat Michigan multiple times. He's won playoff games. The only thing he hasn't done is won a national title. Not sure they can do it this year. Brand new quarterback. Is it going to be McCord or is it going to be Brown? Does it matter is maybe an even more important question, right? Ohio State has rotated quarterbacks the last decade or so, and almost every single one of them has been an NFL draft pick that puts up between 4,000 and 5,000 yards in college every single year. It's hard for me to imagine that that's not going to be the case this season. Whoever their quarterback is, I think will put up good numbers and will play well. On top of that, they've got probably the best wide receivers in all of college football to throw the ball to. I mean, they've got 4 or 5 NFL wide receivers on that team, headlined by Marvin Harrison Jr., but I mean, Emeka Egbuka, the list goes on and on. They're just absolutely loaded at the wide receiver position. I still have some questions. When I say I have questions about something, doesn't mean I think they're going to be bad. So I think a lot of people misunderstand. I have questions about this. They're not going to be. I'm not saying they're going to be bad. I'm saying maybe I don't know. I have some questions about Ohio State's lines of scrimmage, both offensive and defensive. They have been pushed around on occasion over the last couple of years. Oregon did it to them in Columbus a couple of years ago. Michigan did it to them a couple of years ago. Michigan did it last year. They gave up 900 yards rushing in those 3 games alone. They can score a lot of points. They can spread you out. They can attack you down the field with the offense that they run. Can they stop a team when they absolutely need to? The answer to that question the last few years has been no. When they have needed stops against Michigan in the second half the last couple of years, they've been unable to get it. When they needed stops against Georgia last year in the Peach Bowl, they were unable to get it. Georgia absolutely destroyed Ohio State in the fourth quarter of that Peach Bowl. I think outscored them, 18-3 or something like that in the fourth quarter, the money quarter. Ohio State's got to find a way to get key stops defensively late in games in these bigger games if they want to take that next step. And again, I'm not knocking Ohio State. These are honest. I haven't called them soft. I haven't made fun of Ryan Day. There's plenty of time for that in other videos. This is my honest assessment of Ohio State. They've won everything they can win without winning a national title. If you're an Ohio State fan and you want to win a national title, then you've got to be looking at your team and going, okay, where do we need to improve to go from almost at the top to the top? And it's not wholesale changes, but I do feel like Ohio State needs to get tougher along the lines of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. That would be my primary focus if I was Ryan Day. I'm not Ryan Day. I don't know what goes on there at practice. I don't know what they're doing philosophically to try to address any issues or perceived issues that they might have. That's just one guy's opinion. Ohio State right now is as good as you can get without winning a national title. How do they get to that next step? We'll see. I would address the lines of scrimmage and try to toughen up that defense a little bit, tighten it up, especially in the second half. We'll see. But I expect Ohio State to have another really, really good year. They finished 4th in the final AP poll last year at 11-2. I had them at 4 in my April ranking. I slid them down to 5. Ahead of them, I've got Penn State. I'm just having a hard time deciding back and forth between Ohio State and Penn State. If I want to kind of let the cat out of the bag here, I'm planning on doing sort of a playoff prediction video after I get done with the rest of my team prediction videos in a couple of weeks, pretty much right before the season starts. I think we could be headed down a path this season that gets 2 Big Ten teams into the playoffs again. Maybe this year it's Michigan and Penn State instead of Michigan and Ohio State. I'm not predicting that now, but this is why there's a lot of cases you'll notice in this top 10. The Pac-12, I'm having a hard time differentiating these Pac-12 teams. I'm having a hard time slotting Bama in the 7-4 range. I got them at 6. And Penn State and Ohio State, just flip. I could flip-flop them. So if someone wants to tell me that I'm wrong and Ohio State should be ahead of Penn State, I'm not really going to argue with you. I had a hard time. I just decided to flip-flop them. Penn State's got a new quarterback just like Ohio State does. We'll see. Penn State was a good team last year. Penn State and Texas. People, every time you say anything good about Penn State, people go, well, they're picked to do it every year. And anytime you say anything good about Texas, well, they're picked to do it every year. Texas and Penn State are not picked to do anything every year, ever. Oklahoma, like I mentioned, has been picked to be the team in the Big 12 something like 6 of the last 7 years or whatever it is. When was the last time anybody picked Penn State to win the Big 10? This idea that Penn State's picked to do it every year and they don't is ridiculous. Now, I do agree that you can't just be third every year. I mean, eventually you got to beat a Michigan or an Ohio State, and maybe this is the year Penn State can do it. I like what they've got offensively outside of the quarterback position, and it's not that I don't like the quarterback. I do actually like the quarterback, Drew Allar. I think he's a big improvement over Sean Clifford. I was never a Sean Clifford fan. All the guy did was lose big games. That's what it looked like to me as an outsider. So if Drew Allar can live up to his potential, I think he's going to be a big improvement over what Sean Clifford was able to give Penn State. And I absolutely love their ground game with Nick Singleton back there at running back. Defensively, they got one of the best linebackers in the Big Ten. I think they're going to be solid on all three levels, and I think they can give both Ohio State and Michigan a run for the money this year in the Big Ten. Now, they gave them a run for the money last year and came up short both times, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before. They haven't beat Ohio State since 2016, haven't won the Big Ten since 2016. But I think they've got the best chance of winning the Big Ten this year since 2016. So we'll see if James Franklin and company can put it together, but I've got them at 4. Again, this is not a prediction or a projection. This doesn't mean I think Penn State's finishing 4th or making the playoff or whatever. This is where I think teams should be ranked today. I've got Penn State at 4. They finished 7th last year. They were 11-2. I moved them up from 5 in my last ranking in April to 4 today. And then my final 3 stayed the same. So here it is, LSU, Michigan, and Georgia. I don't think there's a rational explanation that anybody can make to rank anybody number 1 other than Georgia or Michigan. Those are the only 2 teams in my mind that a case can be made should be ranked number 1 heading into the season. Again, I'm not talking, different people do their rankings different ways. Some rankings are a prediction or a projection. Mine are not. If you're trying to explain to me why someone should be ranked number 1 today, you better be talking to me about Georgia or Michigan, or I think you're just wasting your breath. That doesn't mean that Georgia and Michigan are the only 2 teams that have a chance of winning the national title, because that's not how I rank teams. I rank teams based on where I think they deserve to be ranked today. And Georgia and Michigan are the only 2 teams that should be considered for a number 1 ranking today, preseason, in my opinion. I went with Georgia, back-to-back national champions. They returned the majority of their defense, which is, they're a defense-driven team. Yes, they lose Stetson Bennett, the quarterback of both national title teams. But if there's a top 10 team in the country that is the least quarterback-driven, it's Georgia. And that's not a knock on Stetson, the greatest college quarterback of all time. That's not a knock on Stetson Bennett. It's a compliment to the way Kirby has built this team and his approach towards Georgia as a football program. A complimentary team. You hear Kirby say it all the time. It almost starts to go in one ear and out the other, but that's really what this team has become. This team is not about any one person. I can guarantee you there will never be a scenario where one player gets hurt and as fans, we run around talking about that cost us the game. At least it shouldn't. Ohio State, man, Alabama, man. It's complimentary football. If you lose somebody, whether it's to injury, draft, or transfer portal, well, good thing you got 85 scholarships. You put the next guy in. Georgia is deep. They're loaded on the defensive line. They've got NFL players on all 3 levels of the defense. They return almost their entire wide receiver room. All their running backs are back with the exception of 1. They return 5 offensive linemen with starting experience. I think they're going to be one of, if not the best teams in college football again in 2023. And Michigan, a lot of the same you can say for Michigan. Plus, they do get their quarterback back. That's why Michigan is the one other team I think could be under consideration as being ranked number 1 as opposed to UGA, because they have a lot coming back just like UGA does. They've been a playoff team 2 years in a row, just like UGA was. But they have a quarterback returning. UGA doesn't. Now, like Georgia, Michigan is also not a quarterback-centric team, but it's clearly an advantage to have your quarterback back versus not. So in the quarterback department, I would give Michigan the edge right now over UGA. Now, again, this is what we know today. By midpoint in the season, it might be that whoever's playing quarterback for Georgia is clearly better than McCarthy or whoever. I'm not suggesting that they will. I'm just saying we don't know because Georgia's quarterback's never played before. But I've got Georgia 1, Michigan 2. And LSU is another team like Michigan that returns just players all over the place and returns both their quarterbacks. Jaden Daniels and Nussmeier both return. Jaden Daniels, it looks like, is going to be the guy at LSU. He got injured last year, and Nussmeier had to play some towards the end, even a little bit in the middle of the season too. But LSU is absolutely loaded. I do have questions about their secondary, so we'll see what happens when they play sort of a pass-happy team, somebody that can stretch the ball. Now, they don't play Tennessee this year like they did last year, which is an advantage. But they've got probably the best defensive player in the SEC in Harold Perkins. A quarterback comes back in Jaden Daniels. They've got Neighbors at wide receiver. I don't know that they have a superstar running back, but they've got a good stable of 2 or 3 really good running backs. Their line of scrimmage on offense is back. They're going to be a really, really good team again in 2023. And again, coaches in their second year tend to take a significant step forward. Not 100% of the time, but well over 50% of the time, a coach in their second year is better than the first year. And LSU last year finished ranked 16th at 10-4. They won the SEC West. They beat Bama, lost to Georgia in the SEC title game, and went on to beat Purdue in a bowl game. I've got them at number 3. So there it is, my top 10. All right, and I'm not going to go through 11-25 through 25 in nearly as much detail as I did the top 10 of this video. It would be 2 or 3 hours long, but 11 through 15, I've got Oregon, Notre Dame, Tennessee, Kansas State, and Clemson. Clemson, how well is Cade Klubnik going to play? What about Garrett Riley as offensive coordinator replacing Brandon Streeter? They lost a lot of NFL talent along their defensive front. They were ranked 90th against the pass last year. So would a secondary be better? This year they play Florida State in the regular season. They play Notre Dame in the regular season. They play Duke in week 1. Clemson, they've lost 3 games each of the last 2 years. They could go 12-0, win the ACC and make the playoffs, or it could be another 2 or 3 loss season. We'll see with Clemson how the offense looks. It's been holding them back for a couple of years. Kansas State at 14, won the Big 12 last year. Deuce Vaughn gone. I like Kansas State. Consistent coaching staff there. Consistent play on the field week after week and year after year. The Big 12's got a team. They popped and they disappear. They popped and they disappear. Kansas State's just been a little, kind of steady. A lot of people have Kansas State playing for the Big 12 title again in 2023. I think they're one of the top 3 teams for sure. I like Texas. I like Kansas State. I like TCU. I like Oklahoma. We'll see which of those sort of come out and finish up with the Big 12 title game. You also have the 4 newcomers to the Big 12, but I got Kansas State at 14. I've got Tennessee at 13. Best year last year since probably 1998. Hendon Hooker gone. Top 2 wide receivers gone. Defensive coordinator still there. Mistake? I don't know. We'll find out. Tennessee's going to have a good offense again. Is Joe Milton going to be as good as Hendon Hooker or almost as good? I don't think Tennessee's offense is going to fall off a cliff. In fact, I think Tennessee's offense will be close to what it was last year. I expect Tennessee to have another good year. Don't know if they'll go 10-2 again. Anything less than 9 wins, though, absolute failure after what we saw last year from Tennessee. They got to go to Alabama this year, whereas they got them at home last year. But they get Georgia at home at the end of the year this year, whereas they had to go to Athens last year. So those 2 games are flip-flopped. Can they split those again like they did last year? That's probably the difference between 10-2 and 9-3. Can they split those, right? Got to play South Carolina. They open up with Virginia. They also travel to Gainesville to play Florida early in the year, to get Texas A&M at home. They play Kentucky. We'll see. It looks like another 10-win season for Tennessee. I've got them at 13. I've got Notre Dame at 12. Notre Dame, I think, could finish the season in the top 10. They've got 3 huge games. They play Southern Cal, they play Clemson, and they play Ohio State. What do they do against those 3 teams? If they go if they win 2 of those, do y'all think Notre Dame could get into the playoffs with 1 loss? I don't. I think because they're not in the conference, because they avoid a 13th game, I don't think you should reward them by putting them into the college football playoff with 1 loss. But let's say they beat Ohio State and Clemson and lose to Southern Cal, and Southern Cal's undefeated or 1 loss, and that's Notre Dame's only loss, and they've got 2 really good wins. It's going to depend what happens in the other conferences. Now, the bigger question is, can Notre Dame beat 2 of those 3 teams? Sam Hartman shows up at quarterback, which is a massive upgrade over anything else they've had at the quarterback situation in a long, long time. Heck, expectations a lot higher in year 2 for Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame than they were last year. We'll see how he handles those expectations as a young coach, but I've got Notre Dame at 12, and I've got Oregon at 11 for reasons I've already explained. Oregon, Southern Cal, Utah, Washington, I'm having a hard time differentiating between those 4 teams. But again, year 2 under Dan Lanning. I like coaches year 2 taking steps forward. All right, let's go 20 through 16. I've got Wisconsin at 20, Oregon State at 19, Texas Tech at 18, TCU at 17, and Utah at 16. Is Utah the most disrespected team in college football? Maybe. They've won the Pac-12 2 years in a row. They beat Southern Cal and Lincoln Riley not once, but twice last year. They've got a ton of talent coming back, including their quarterback, and absolutely nobody talks about them or mentions them, including me. I'm throwing myself in the mix too. Look, they've won the the Pac-12 2 years in a row. I've got them 4th. I've got Southern Cal, Washington, and Oregon all ahead of them. I'm guilty of this too. They've got the most consistent coaching staff in the Pac-12. It's very strange. I'm guilty of it too. Would you be shocked if they won the Pac-12 for a 3rd straight year? I wouldn't, but for some reason, I've got them ranked. I've got 3 other Pac-12 teams ahead of them. Why do we do this to Utah? I don't know, but we do. TCU at 17, a remarkable season last year. Came up short in the Big 12 title game, but because they were undefeated, they got into the playoffs anyway. Everybody wrote them off. Nobody gave them a chance. They didn't deserve to be there. Then they went out and they beat an undefeated Michigan team. Punched their ticket to the national title game, where, of course, they got absolutely donkey drug by Georgia for 3.5 hours up and down the field, the worst beating in the history of the college football bowl system. Not just playoffs, not just BCS. We've been playing bowl games for 100 years. No one has won a bowl game by a wider margin than what Georgia did at TCU, but still a great year for TCU. You've got them at 17. Are they a little disrespected this year? They lose Max Duggan. They lose their offensive coordinator. They lose a first-round wide receiver in Quentin Johnston. Problem, if you're TCU, you don't recruit at a high enough level to for people to just make the assumption that you can automatically replace all those things. So TCU at 17 is probably a fair ranking. Texas Tech at 18. Possible dark horse. I like Texas Tech. They were good last year. No one talked about it. They beat Texas. They play Oregon early in the year at home. If Texas Tech beats Oregon early in the year at home, some people are going to have to recalculate their predictions for the Big 12, including myself. I've got Texas Tech as the 3rd or 4th best Big 12 team right now. If they beat Oregon early in the year at home, they could become a problem for some Big 12 teams later in the year. I like what Texas Tech is doing. I've got them at 18. I've got Oregon State at 19, won 10 games last year for the first time in about 15 years, it seems like. Again, this handful, this sort of jumble of Pac-12 teams and who comes out on top, I would put Oregon State in that mix too. I've got them at 19. Wisconsin at 20 is interesting to me. Everyone forgot about them last year. They were really, really bad. One of the worst years they've had in a while. They fired their head coach. They've brought a new quarterback in, a new head coach, and a new offensive coordinator. Luke Fickell comes in as head coach from Cincinnati. They've got Tanner Mordecai at quarterback from SMU, and an offensive coordinator that's been running the air raid. Now, this is going to be weird to see at Wisconsin, but I don't expect them to go sort of all in on that air raid this year. They still have Braylon Allen, probably the best player on their team. He's a running back. You all know the history with Wisconsin and running backs over the last 10 to 20 years or whatever, going all the way back to Ron Dane. I mean, just, it's plug and play. They've got an NFL offensive line and an NFL running back every single year. Their problem has been they can't complete a forward pass to save their life. They've been stuck in like 1998 football mode for what seems like forever. They're trying to move that forward with Luke Fickell, Tanner Mordecai, and this new offensive coordinator. We'll see. I like Wisconsin as one of the most improved teams in the country in 2023, at least in terms of overall record. They would be my pick right now to win the Big Ten West. I don't think they'll beat whoever comes out of the East. They do play Ohio State in the regular season at home. What a monumental win for Luke Fickell that would be. If he could somehow pull off an upset against Ohio State at home in year one at Wisconsin. Be an interesting team to watch this year, the Badgers. I've got them at 20. And then 25 to 21, I have South Carolina, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, and Tulane. So Tulane, the only non-power, quote-unquote, Power 5 team. I don't know if we even need to use that term anymore, that I have in my top 25. This is a respect thing for Tulane. They won 1 or 2 games 2 years ago. Last year, they go 12-2, whatever it was. They beat Southern Cal in the Fiesta Bowl, I believe it was. It's an amazing year. And they return a lot of pieces there at Tulane. They could be really, really good again in 2023. Don't know if they'll finish in the top 25 again. But again, this is just kind of a respect thing based on where they finished last year. I went ahead and put them at 21. I've got Ole Miss at 22. One of the best running teams in the SEC last year. Should be again. Quentin Judkins is back. Quinshon Judkins, I think is his name. They do lose Zach Evans. Now, I know Judkins was the better of the two running backs, but having a 1-2 punch at running back makes both running backs better. So will losing Zach Evans have any type of a negative impact on Quinshon Judkins? Is he going to have to play a lot more, or will Ole Miss find another running back to kind of help offset some of his workload? And can they improve when it comes to the passing game? They've brought in what seems like a dozen quarterbacks from around the country. We'll see what Lane Kiffin ends up doing with it. Defensively, they need to get a lot better. And when is Lane Kiffin going to get a meaningful win? His best win since he got to Ole Miss is against Indiana in an Outback Bowl. Lane Kiffin needs to start winning some big games. The reputation of Lane Kiffin is becoming a lot better than the reality of Lane Kiffin. I don't know, but I've got them at 22. Oklahoma at 23. Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Miami, Texas A&M. These are teams that were no good last year that all have potential to be top 20 teams this year because they've got top 20 talent. That's why it's so funny that when those teams are bad. I make this analogy all the time. It's not funny when a team like Vanderbilt or Kansas or Rutgers goes 5-7. Like, there's nothing funny about that. They're not a good team. They don't recruit well. We know they're not good. When Wisconsin and Texas A&M and Oklahoma and Miami all in the same season are terrible, that's alarming. And that was the case last year. Oklahoma, like Wisconsin, is going to be a lot better in 2023 than they were in 2022. Record-wise, how much better? We'll see. I think they could, 8-4. I think they could also 10-2. Brent Venables, year 2. You know how I feel about coaches in their second year. So I've got Oklahoma at 23. Quarterback got to stay healthy there. North Carolina, I've got them at 24. Drake May might be the best quarterback in college football, not named Caleb Williams. Now, their defense is horrendous. They lost some wide receivers. I don't think they're going to have a great record overall. So, as far as Drake May and the Heisman, you can forget about that. But I think Drake May is really, really good, and I think the NFL is salivating over him. But I've got North Carolina at 24, and I've got South Carolina at 25, which is interesting. They play in week 1. North Carolina and South Carolina do. Ole Miss and Tulane, by the way, who I've got at 21 and 22, they play in week 2 or 3, something like that. They play during the regular season, so we'll see. But I've got North Carolina 24, South Carolina at 25. Great end of the season for South Carolina with wins against top 10 Tennessee and top 10 Clemson. Came up a little short in the bowl game against Notre Dame, but another team that's got a quarterback returning. Now, they lost some key pieces to the portal, and it concerns me. Their ability to run the ball offensively and stop the run defensively. Those are my main concerns for South Carolina. They couldn't run the ball last year to save their life, and they couldn't stop the run last year to save their life. They got to clean that up. But 8-4 in the regular season last year, we'll see what they can do this year. But there you go. The final off-season top 25 ranking by yours truly, Uncle Lou. Be sure to let me know down below where you disagree. Have a good morning.